Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone. To our webcast satellite sites, we would just like to apologize for the delay and hope that you are seeing this video live now. Please join with me in acknowledging that we live and work on the traditional lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Coast Salish First Peoples. My name is Maureen Carnello, and I'm an Associate Superintendent at the Vancouver Board of Education. Could I just ask everyone a reminder in this audience to please put your cell phones on silent or vibrate? And I'd like to begin by welcoming our distinguished guests today, Elders Shane Pointe of the Musqueam Band, National Chief Shawn Atleo, Honorable Minister of Education Peter Fassbender, Provincial Superintendent of Aboriginal Achievement DeDe DeRose, Dr. Blythe Frank, Dean of Faculty of Education, and Professor Joanne Archibald from UBC Faculty of Education, the Chair of our Vancouver Board of Education, Patti Bacchus, and I believe that we have other trustees present as well, including Vice Chair Mike Lombardi, Ken Clement, Alan Wong, and have I missed anyone? Welcome to all of them. And we'd also like to welcome representatives from Aboriginal organizations and communities within the Vancouver area, and representatives from our stakeholder and partner groups within the Vancouver Board of Education, and a special welcome to our staff and students in the Vancouver Board of Education. Thank you for joining with us for this special presentation today. I've got two tasks this morning. One is to provide some housekeeping information prior to beginning the formal part of the program, and the second is to briefly set the context for today. Firstly, this is a unique event for the district, as shown by the 15-minute delay on the live broadcast. So we are broadcasting to 7 sites around our school district. We also have staff gathered to view the presentation at the Musqueam Cultural Center and the VSO School of Music building. I sincerely hope everybody out there is viewing this now in real time. And following the presentation at 10 a.m., the broadcast to satellite sites will end. And for those staff who've indicated that they would like to participate in a facilitated discussion following this, you'll receive further information from the lead facilitators at each of your sites, and they can wave to you now. And for Magoo, that's me. So here at Magoo, we will pause at 10 a.m. for a refreshment break and to allow staff to move to other locations for other professional development sessions. Originally, we had a panel discussion scheduled for 10:30 here at Magoo Secondary, but unfortunately, National Chief Atleo's schedule has changed in the last 24 hours, and he needs to leave earlier than anticipated. And as a result, the panel discussion will have to be canceled. But we feel so fortunate and honored to have him here in attendance and appreciate the time he has been able to give to present to our staff and guests today. And now just to set some context for why we have this session. This is actually thanks, I think, to Don Fiddler, our district principal of Aboriginal Education, who about a year ago, when we were talking about how we might raise the profile and issue of Aboriginal education in the district, planted the seed for this idea, and he and his team have spent over a year working on it. The Vancouver School District signed its first enhancement agreement 5 years ago. We're in our 5th year, and this is our year of renewal. So as part of that process, we've been re-examining how we support student success in bringing a renewed focus to the issue of Aboriginal student achievement in the Vancouver Board of Education. And this has included a restructuring of the service delivery model to students, as well as strengthening a culture of shared responsibility for student success, from the school and community level right to the senior team level. And we are slowly seeing gains in student graduation and completion rates, and we know there is still a very significant gap to be closed in improving Aboriginal students' educational outcomes. As well, our trustees gave a clear direction that every school plan was to include a goal to increase knowledge, awareness, and appreciation of Aboriginal cultures and contributions amongst all our students, staffs, and employees. So this event today is part of our commitment to raise that profile, to support staff in developing their own knowledge and awareness of issues affecting outcomes for Aboriginal learners within the school system, and we hope it serves as a catalyst for reflection and conversation. Now, to begin the formal part of the program, it is my great privilege to introduce and welcome Elder Shane Pointe, member of the Musqueam Indian Band. Shane Pointe is from the Pointe family and is a proud member of the Musqueam people. He is a highly respected Musqueam community member, ceremonial traditional speaker, and cultural educator. He provides protocol and ceremonial guidance for events nationally, internationally, and in Vancouver. We are very happy to have Shane with us today. He has been an Aboriginal support worker with the Board of Education. He was a trial support coordinator for Indian Residential Schools Survivor Society for many years. And today he's a proud team member of the Musqueam Health Staff as the National Native Alcohol and Drug Awareness Program representative. And we're honored to have him bring greetings to us today. Please join me in welcoming Elder Shane Pointe.
I have nephews here. Put up your hands. Oh, they're a bit shy. I first want to acknowledge a language and a family bond with the gentleman that you're going to listen to, Shawn Atleo. Shawn Atleo is Nuchanoth, and I'm proud and honored to say that my mother is Nuchanoth as well, comes from the Hupichisic tribe, and we have close blood ties to this man. So I wanted to acknowledge that this morning. He mentioned a very important word to me that I remember in the teachings that I was giving, and the translation in Coast Salish is the word Snowayeth. Snowayeth, in those teachings, the word that comes out of it is Nutsamat. Nutsamat means that we're one. Nutsamat Shqualwin means that we're one heart and we're one mind. And when he mentioned the word Hahuthi to me, that's the chord that it struck with me, that we're one, Nutsamat, Shqualwin. We're all one heart and one mind, providing teachings, not only to the young people around us, but sharing them with each other. Ooh, ooh. See you when us me wa see you when hey way no hey way no mamina us not samot squall away not samot squall away maminas oh Heitzapka Siam, Heichka, 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 Saas Squalwin, Mammonas, Heitzapka, Saas Squalwin, Mammonas, Quumthit Squalwin. I'm thanking all of you leaders for using your considerable strength and generosity for lifting up the minds and the hearts of children, making them stronger, stronger so that they can move through the world with dignity and integrity, with generosity in their hearts. So I'm thanking you all for that. Heitzapka Siam, Heichka, Heichka, Saas Squalwin, Mammonas, Heichka, Heichka, Heichka. Thank you.
Good morning. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our National Chief, Shawn Atleo. Shawn is an hereditary chief from the Yahusat First Nations, and in July 2012, he was elected to a second consecutive term, 3-year mandate as National Chief to the Assembly of First Nations. Advancing a vision of supporting and enabling the success of every First Nation on the basis of their rights and responsibilities, National Chief Atleo and the National Executive have taken forward a bold plan of action and engagement with all sectors of Canadian society. First Nations from across Canada supported Anshut in confirming education as a top priority for the Assembly. And since then, he has been a tireless advocate for First Nations by spending time in First Nations in every region of the country, with federal, provincial, and territorial leaders, and with national and international audiences. Previously, Anshut served 2 terms as Regional Chief of the BC Assembly First Nations, and committed to the principle of working together through inclusion and respect, he forged the historic Leadership Accord among First Nations leadership in BC in 2005. In 2008, Anshut's commitment to education was recognized in his appointment as Chancellor of Vancouver Island University, becoming BC's first Indigenous Chancellor. He has been honored to receive several honorary doctorates of laws from universities throughout Canada, and he has also received the University of Technology in Sydney Alumni Award for Excellence in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. In February 2012, he was awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for his advocacy work on behalf of First Nations across Canada. Anshut began his career as a facilitator, trainer, and entrepreneur, working with and for First Nations peoples. He holds a Master's of Education from the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, in partnership with the University of British Columbia, University of the Western Cape, South Africa, and University of Linköping, Sweden. Anshut is supported and by and gains strength from his partner of more than 25 years, Nancy, and their 2 adult children, Tyson and Tara. Traditional teachings have guided Anshut to serve First Nations as a leader, facilitator, mediator, planner, and teacher. And finally, most importantly, he is an excellent example of the excellence in Vancouver schools, having been a graduate of David Thompson School. National Chief.
think he was going to ask me if I could reach. I could. Yes, Mr. Magoo, I can reach. My old soccer coach is here. Thank you so much. True. Na atadlich chani tlakshet tsika koko. It's a new chanotlet. Just a few words in my language to pay deepest respects, as was already mentioned. Kleko hatwea yakisu ah eapit. Tikshitsisi hatwea hiksu Musqueam. Seawatu Squamish. Ma Chinopsik, Ma Tikitsu, Sit Yaksa Inchet. I am A Inchet. I come from the village of Ahousit, New Channel Territories. I'm honored to be here with all of you, especially my relatives. It's good to see you. We begin so often with acknowledging how it is that we're related, how it is that we're connected, to understand those powerful bonds, but also to acknowledge to those whose roots come from right here. We're reminded to be mindful that somebody else's laws apply in the territory where you're visiting. Walk lightly. Be careful. Remember that you conduct yourself in a way that represents where I come from. Tlakishpit Ma'as. I come from the house of Tlakishpit. I want to express my appreciation as well to our elder who performed an invocation, offering up some opening reflections, but also the way to conduct affairs that we recognize in the form of a chant. We may call it a prayer chant, in my language, that takes us a little away from just the cerebral, the synapses that are firing, and in the mental realm to connect the spirit and the heart. The power of ceremony, the likes of which every culture around the world knows very well. So it's an honor to have had this space opened up with that ceremony. I'm incredibly impressed that to have the great privilege personally to have been greeted by and met as the elder said, by his nephews. They acted as ushers. We don't need to remind everybody here who is at an event during a major hockey game of epic proportions in Sochi. It's one thing to be impressed for the adults, but when you've got Walter, Dylan, Matthew, and Phoebe, for 4 students to be here with the adults early in the morning on a Pro D day, I lift my hands up to you in deepest respect. So often we talk, oh, by the way, hello to all the David Thompson peeps that are in the house, but also those who are online. I also went to John Oliver, and I went to many, oh, got J.O. here. Yeah, I went there. Tyee Elementary, University Hill. Yeah, holy smokes, I got stories. Walter Moberly down on the south side as well, and points in between. And I am extremely grateful to have been invited here. I thank my friend Corey Wilson, who first expressed her work with education locally and connecting the realm of the working world, skills training development, higher education, post-secondary, but also the important linkages with the school system. And I think Corey and I, coming from families from the coast, we both have this personal experience of being city kids, Indians in the city, if you will. And I was asking the students how it is these days being First Nation. I said, do you guys get called chief too? That's what it was like when I was a kid in the schools. Everyone was called chief. And I remember lots of hockey players tell that story too. And I mention that because my soccer coach is here somewhere. Mr. Magoo, I know I'm not saying your name right with the proper Scottish accent, but I went to school with his daughter, who might be here as well, from David Thompson. And it really brings back a lot of memories to be here in Magee, not from Magee specifically. I don't think I got in any trouble here. I think we won some soccer games here on our way to a soccer championship. But to be here with you in this moment in 2014, having a conversation at this juncture in history, I believe is an incredible opportunity. And for you to take the time for this, I feel greatly honored. For for us to be talking about the learning not only of our children, not only of those of you young people who are often told you're the leaders of tomorrow, you're the leaders of the future. And what I'm feeling today right now is especially our young people. You're the leaders of right now by what you're accomplishing. Right now in every village, in every community, in every school across the entire country. You're picking up the legacy of coming from strong, proud, deep traditions of strong, proud Indigenous nations. And notwithstanding what we've come through, you're helping us to take the next level. So I got to tell you how proud I am of you being here on a Pro-D Day. That's what I'm trying to say, is that we're stepping up, we're stepping forward, we're rebuilding our peoples and our nations. And you here in the school board leadership, we're here with the minister. And as was pointed out, a number of leaders who have said, we're going to join in this effort. So Minister Fassbender, I'm feeling honored and privileged that we got a chance to have this conversation together at this moment. The history that was just reflected, 2005, feels like forever ago when a leadership accord was forged in British Columbia. I'll touch a little bit on that. To think that we've got the school board chair, Patti Bacchus, and Ken Clement, a longtime leader for our people here, taking the opportunity to put your name forward to be a school trustee, saying, I will contribute. I will bring my many years of experience, as I know I can barely see you over my water here, as we both work together in Vancouver, supporting our people. And you stand as as a younger person, as a mentor for many of us. We've watched and learned from you, and that you're able to step forward is something I think it's admirable. I really respect that, admire that, find inspiration in what you've done. And so thank you for that. And I had a moment to talk briefly, like I mentioned, to my coach, Mr. Magoo, about the power of sport. And think about this for a moment. We've got a fella from Garden, I think Garden River is where Ted Nolan's from, in back east. First Nations coach, coaching the Latvian team, pushing Canada to 1-1 deep into the game. But another First Nation by the name of Carey Price from Algacho, British Columbia, ended up pulling out the win. First Nations, I think, reflecting in moments like this, that like my late grandmother said, we can if we set our hearts and mind to it, we can accomplish anything that we want to. And the power of sport, I was reflecting with Mr. Magoo, we were swapping stories about when I was 16, because I can't remember which one of you guys was 16 that I was talking to. That it feels like a long time ago for me, but the lessons learned in school and in sport about respect, about fairness. Mr. Magoo would say, whatever background you come from, be proud. Be proud. And of course, he's Scottish. And we're talking about a recent experience that I had at the University of Edinburgh. They have a school for Canadian studies in Scotland. How weird is that, to come from Canada and have people there studying who we are? And they knew exactly the major issues that were happening here in Canada. And I met the staff and the faculty. I gave my presentation. And sure enough, I said, with the advent of social media already, I think there's been some tweeting about this conversation here today. I said, I bet you that because of the moment where I was over there, I said, I bet you before this day is over, somebody will get an email or a tweet from Elsipogtog, New Brunswick, about the protests that are happening and the violence and the great conflict. Before I got the next paragraph out of my mouth, somebody in the audience put up their hand and said, we just got a note from Elsipogtog, from New Brunswick. So you can guess that this was just recently that I was over there. I was there in October. I was there in the United Kingdom, in Britain, in London, speaking at the University of Oxford, reaching out to leaders over there, as is my role as National Chief, to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation. One of the very first formal interactions between our people as Indigenous peoples here and the Crown before Canada was even formed. And that initial expression was one of mutual respect, of seeing each other, if you can put it that way. The way Elder Pointe, we see each other through the lineages, we see each other's laws, we see each other's ceremonies. and we support the learning of where each of us come from. And this moment that we've arrived at here in the winter of 2014, in my view, we are at an incredible turning point, a moment of reckoning not characterized by this week, this month, not characterized necessarily by the year 2013, which was an incredible year, one of unprecedented engagement, of conversation, of young people demonstrating leadership by having round dances in malls and in villages and in cities and the rural sector all across this country. And they were joined by Canadians of all backgrounds, new immigrants and those who came from families that were 10 generations in Canada, under the banner of what was described and still is the Idle No More movement. That notion that what's happening to me is not comfortable and something different has to occur in my life. So when I arrive here with you in this school at this moment, I think about those that have been mentioned here, the family that I come from, Dr. Joanne Archibald, who's here with us, you, Doctor, and so many others as being the champions for our people, bearing in many respects the full brunt of some of the worst aspects of that which we're seeking to overcome, the residential school era and system. My father is in that mix at the age of close to 75 and a few months. I remember so clearly speaking to the superintendents that he was told at one time when we were in Bella Bella on the Central Coast, my dad was teaching there. There was a story told that a teacher was needed in a house-it in my village. And that the community of a house-it, it was not necessarily a place for a teacher to go because it had no future. The notion at that time, not so long ago, was they're killing themselves off and it won't exist in 20 years or 40 years. And so here in 2014, I can proudly stand here and say, my dad picked us up from Bella Bella and we marched back to a house-it. He graduated the first group of grade 7s, helped see the first school built. We now have a second school built. We're a thriving community of 1,200 people. Dad went on to get his bachelor's, his master's, and his doctorate degree, and was the first to do so in my family, first to do so in our village, recognized as perhaps the first Dr. Joanne Archibald, I don't know at the time, because I was going to these schools I was telling you about. That's how we ended up in the city. See the resilience, young people, that are those who've come before us, those older than us that are here with us now, but who've also gone on before, the kind of resilience that they've demonstrated for us. And I want to express my respect through you, Dr. Joanne Archibald, and so many others who've led the way for us. Thank you for that resilience as the generation who has given us this opportunity that we must now occupy. And by extension, it's just not me. I'm trying to be young now, you guys, but I'm 47, and I know that doesn't help you, that you're not going to let me join you. But there's many here who would say that I am young. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that help. So I think for me, it's about this notion of applying a sense of context around how we end up in this discussion. It's what my dad's thesis was back in the day. The theory of context, the idea of education, coming from an industrial model, that which was based upon the idea that somebody's going to pour knowledge into your brain, like crack it open and pour it in, and that you will take it in, and then you're going to go off and be human capital in a market economy. The idea that it's principally about coming into a school system, acquiring a tool set that matches somehow or helps build an economy, and then you go contribute to that economy. And what is exciting about this moment and what Indigenous peoples will continue to bring to the equation is maybe an oversimplistic way to reflect back that perhaps education is more about supporting the growth of actors in a more civil society, the growth of actors in a more civil world. And the idea of how hopa umatukwitasnish, that which we heard in the opening statement, the idea of learning from one another, of hope beats stuff pushing up against one another is the way we would talk about it in our potlatch system. What I saw Shane doing here today, that chant that he does. Back home, knowledge we would acquire by going up the rivers. I don't know if any of you were sent at the age of 13 or the age of 7 or 8 like I was, to go and to dive into the waters, the icy cold waters in the deep of winter either in the rivers or the streams or in the ocean, as a way to acquire knowledge. A knowledge acquisition through the spiritual ceremonies that we were raised on. And this is not the only culture through which there's the notion of the acquisition of knowledge through other means. And it feels really good that the school board, that the leadership, that the minister is here at a moment in time when for 40 years, First Nations have been pursuing First Nations control of First Nations education. I have somebody who I've really appreciated spending time with, Verna Kirkness, who educators in British Columbia, many of you would know from Manitoba. She was, in many respects, considered the queen of Indian control of Indian education, because that's what it was called back then. She was sharing me stories about her and the first president of the National Indian Brotherhood. So 40 years ago, it wasn't called the National Chief, the president of the National Indian Brotherhood at the time. The National Indian Brotherhood became the AFN. The first major effort that leaders were trying to undertake was to acquire control of education, which currently sits right now for First Nations, particularly on reserve, in the Minister of Indian Affairs. See, I'm even using the old terms. He's not called that anymore, but we're stubborn. It's tough to get us to call people when they change their titles. Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. For 40 years, and she told me the story about efforts to pursue and I was telling this to Justin Trudeau. I said, to your dad, to your late dad, thinking about these moments, because now his son is pursuing the office of Prime Minister as leader of the Liberal Party. A 40-year effort. And so Verna was helping me to reflect on the moment that it arrived, because why? It was about our leaders thinking back on the experience and the current experience at the time of the residential school system. We think about the residential school system and its era. Of course, it was under the guise of an education policy, an attempt to pour in knowledge that, in fact, was something other than being Musqueam, was something other than being Ahosit. It was coming from the other. And it had deep and very traumatic consequences for our peoples and for the relationship between our peoples and Canada. And I'm thankful that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is undertaking its work. Appreciative that we were able to encourage there to be a year-long extension. Thankful that the stories that must be told, the shining of a bright light into the darkest corners of what's difficult to face up, which is the only way to advance and to learn and to heal and to reconcile. Without truth, there can be no reconciliation. And so stories last year of what my dad told me when I was in school, he would tell me about how kids in school would get different food, and he didn't understand it at the time. Why would some kids get some food and some kids get other food? So last year, the country, it was all in the media, and we're finally learning and covering these stories that kids were used as experiments in school, unbeknownst to the kids or to their parents. So the Truth and Reconciliation process, we're right in the middle of that. It struck me as I'm standing over the casket of the late Nelson Mandela in Johannesburg just a few months ago, sharing a moment where the chiefs had supported this notion that I would go and I would perform ceremony, which I was thankful to do, because late Nelson Mandela himself came from a chief's family in a village in a tribe in South Africa. And he was working to overcome the sense of injustices in his country. He did come to Canada. Former national chiefs honored him, and the chiefs of country honored him at the time. And so it struck me at the end of 2013, this incredible year of consciousness raising, that I was supported to be there to help remember the passing of a man who influenced his country while there, traveling with 4 former prime ministers, 1 current prime minister, 2 former governor generals, the leader of the official opposition, an unprecedented delegation. We were sharing in this moment, going through the museum that commemorated apartheid, having conversations like we should never forget that regime in South Africa was inspired by the Indian Act and Reserve System in Canada. That's some of the influence that the system that we're talking about, that included the process of education that this school district, this school board, this city, this province is responsible for now, reflecting on and doing something differently. That's what this conversation is about here, I believe, today. That continual learning, that partnership, that seeing one another. So it didn't. I think for me, it was a moment that struck me deeply. And I was getting words. My BlackBerry actually died on the pavement there. And it's horrible to be without your BlackBerry if you're dependent on it. So I had to get one of those old school little phones I don't think you guys even remember them. There might as well have been a crank phone for some of you. And I was sending these text messages back and forth, and then I heard something wonderful. I've overseen, I don't know how many national assemblies. They told me while I was gone, they had the best national assembly they've ever had in December. And so maybe I should stay away from these assemblies because they were so successful. One of the major areas of consensus that the chiefs came together on was to reject the former proposal by the federal government for First Nations Education Act. They set out 5 conditions about what would be acceptable. This is a continuation of the 40-year effort that First Nations across the country have been undertaking. Lots has led up to it, many details, many moments like in 2009 where the chief stood up behind a youth leader nationally, or the leadership of late Shannon Kustachin. She was grade 8. She passed away tragically in a car accident, but she's become known as a hero amongst young people for the work that she did in advocating for education, staying in Attawapiskat. We deserve a school like anyone else in this country. We need over 40 schools right now amongst First Nations in the country. And of course, there are challenges created with things like housing and lack of safe drinking water, or the economies, that created the kind of flow between village and reserve and city, just like I experienced and that I've reflected back to you. Because I was home every summer in a house, working on the fish boats, tying up in Alert Bay, and getting high scores at the arcade up in Alert Bay on Galaga. And this is the moment that we've arrived at. These stories of late Nelson Mandela overcoming that regime, Canada beginning to understand through the Truth and Reconciliation what happened in the residential school era. We have members of Reconciliation Canada here, and one of the most heartwarming moments, one of the moments we find ourselves in includes, over this winter, marching with, was it something like 60,000 people? 60,000 people showed up under the leadership of Chief Robert Joseph, Bobby Joe, as he's lovingly known by so many, who, like a chief would do, called the people and said, we have work to do, just like he does at a potlatch. And it was so heartwarming to be there that rainy day because 60,000 plus people showed up to stand and march in solidarity with the survivors of the residential school era, saying, we are with you. We're going to walk beside you. We're going to support you in this journey. We're going to be part of the work going forward. It was an incredible, heartwarming moment to listen to the words of late Martin Luther King, his daughter, speak at the beginning of that march. Somebody can help me remember her first name. Bernice, Dr. Bernice King. Incredible speech, linking, helping us to remember that while the students study big moments like Mandela's, Gandhi's efforts, Martin Luther King's efforts, that the links are being made right here in British Columbia, I see in the press, between the efforts in the civil rights era, the fears that were there around the economics of overcoming slavery. We hear some of the same fears around economics in Canada about First Nations as well. We also see, I think, increasing recognition. We're the fastest growing segment to the Canadian population, First Nations over half under the age of 25. This at a time when Canada's mainstream is aging at a rapid pace. People are concerned, who's going to pay my pension? Who's going to take care of my health needs in the future? And I'm got my hands up and I'm going, those 4 guys over there are going to help do it. So I believe that education that was once tool in the view now increasingly shared view in this country, once used as a tool of oppression, to hold down, to pull apart, to tear apart families, to remove kids from their teachings, from their elders, remove them from the land, their language, their ceremonies. Now education gets to be the tool to pull us together, the tool of emancipation, the tool of freedom, the tool to reconnect young people to their languages, their heritage, their culture. Spend time with the elders. I see schools now back east in the Mi'kmaq territory achieving graduation rates that are over 90%. They've got the Elder Center right there in the school, and there's a dentist right there in the school. That's a strange notion. You see the way the educators, leaders, and the parents and leaders are coming together in some parts of the country are seeing hahopa, the notion of learning, that holistic aspect starting to come together now. And this is the power of Indigenous people's worldviews beginning to take shape and not only influence and seek to be seen, but more than that, to influence the notions of education and learning itself. We have so much to offer. Our knowledge is real knowledge. Oftentimes, like just today, there's articles in the press that somehow put science above the knowledge that Indigenous peoples have, that somehow there's a superiority of one over the other. Not a new notion. We've got lots of philosophers. In fact, John Ralston Saul says in relation to the recognition of the power of Indigenous worldviews and philosophies, he said, when asked, what would you do to education when it comes to supporting Indigenous populations? He said, I would blow up every school of philosophy in this country, is what he said. So to really examine the underpinnings of how it is, what kind of a system that has been created, and the power of education to keep questioning that and to keep learning. The rigors of the academy offer a powerful opportunity to do that. We have the power of Indigenous ways of knowing and science being able to exist. We've seen it over and over again, side by side. They're in our stories. They're in our stories about creation. I remember a moment with a biologist back home, and she was showing me a primordial slime mold. I don't know what a primordial slime mold is. It's just a big pile of, I don't want to say what it looks like. You know, it's like, it looks like that. And we were talking about this slime mold, and it was being explained to me that when food is scarce, when the resources are scarce, that the biology of this slime mold, of course, they don't have brains like we do, but there's signals that get sent out, and so the slime, all the different particles, they come together so that they can help each other when food is scarce. When food is plentiful, it spreads apart again and goes out and it reintegrates itself back out. What an incredible notion. So I told this friend biologist of mine about the story of Atmacoas, about the first human in Nuchonal, that arose because a woman was sad without comfort, care, and without a connection. And so she was throwing down the mucus, and it landed in a mussel shell. And out of this pile of mucus came the first human amongst Nuchonal. Real powerful story that I was able to talk to her about this primordial slime mold and physics and biology and theories around it, and then the stories of Nuchonal and where we come from and the links to the natural world around us, that you pay respect to the tree. You talk to the plants before you take it down. You don't just take down the whole tree to take it down. You take down a part of it, perhaps the bark, at the right time of the year so that the tree can go on living. Or you take part through a plank, but then you go on, you take a plank from another tree so that the organisms can keep growing and can keep thriving. And you ask permission, of course. Or when you take the tree down, that you explain it's going to be transformed. Or when you go whale hunting like our people did, you petition the whale. You ask for the whale to grab onto the harpoon, not because you're a great whale hunter and that you've got all this prowess and power. You humble yourself and you ask for the whale to transform itself into the resources for the people so that the people can be sustained. And you petition the whale. You go fasting and praying in the mountains for months. You ask the community to work together because no whale hunter can accomplish this feat unto themselves. It has to be an event that everyone's participating in, everyone's praying for, everyone's doing something that will help accomplish the capturing of that whale. In the prairies, they call education the new buffalo. You can hear what I'm saying, that in Nuchonal, we call education it's our new whale. The challenge is the rigor of achieving an education, beginning with graduating from grade 12. You will graduate, right? Right? Yes, so it begins with, let's set the expectations at graduation. We can have what we say. If we say we're going to graduate, we will graduate. We set our mind to it, and we purposefully move towards that. Something I learned in grade 11 from my dad was around algebra, and I'll begin to conclude around this sentiment. I believe it applies to this moment around education, around achieving First Nations control of First Nations education, about in this moment that close to half of the resources for education are sent and expended or in the provincial systems. It requires us to really see this as an opportunity for relationships, for reconciliation, through the lenses of the Royal Proclamation, the treaties, through the lens of the Canadian Constitution, through the lens of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which says that First Nations have a right to design an education system that works for them. That's the moment that we've arrived at, and why I'm so thankful that I know there's many Indigenous leaders here from very many backgrounds. The story from Algebra 11 goes like this. I didn't find I was very good at math. How good are you guys at math? Not very good. Okay, I'm with you, brother. I'm with you. I didn't feel very confident at math. And so I would go to my dad. Dad's very good at math, all right? He did quantum physics. Okay, so another thing that Dad could do that was extremely impressive. Dad, I can't do this math, I would tell him. It's too hard. You can have what you say, son. But Dad, I don't understand it. I'm not smart enough. I can't do this. You can have what you say, son. But Dad, there must be just some easy template you can give me, like a secret key. No, son. I can't do this. I don't understand it. You can have what you say. Dad just kept standing still and repeating this, what became a mantra. The short part of the story goes that I didn't make it through the first round of Algebra 11. So that was part of my learning. I didn't give it 100%. That's what Dad was trying to tell me. I was trying to take the easy way. I didn't dig in. I didn't spend the time. I didn't have the confidence to be vulnerable, to take the risk to succeed in algebra that year. So I took it a second time around, because that's what happens when you don't get it the first time around and you have aspirations to go beyond high school, which we also need to set up those. We're gonna go beyond high school, right? Okay, so there's yeses happening here. Remember, it's Pro D Day, so we gotta support these guys especially. Second time around, I dug in on Algebra 11 when I was in grade 12. And I had a big teacher, and I'm not gonna say his name, Mr. Prasad, from the Caribbean. And I remember him whacking me over the head with a car antenna. They had car antennas back then. And it was a mild form of corporal punishment, okay? It's not allowed anymore. This is not anything that is allowed to be used, but he said to me, boy, you're gonna be a basket weaver. You're gonna be a basket weaver. I said, my granny's a basket weaver. It's a pretty honorable profession. So you could say I was maybe a little bit of a mischievous guy when I was in school, like some of us were. I went in and I learned this lesson that Dad was helping me to understand, that Mr. Magoo was helping me understand in soccer, about learning how to get out of our own way and be vulnerable to the risk of trying 100%. Digging in and passing Algebra 11 the second time around with the help of my then girlfriend, much smarter than me, and now wife of close to 28 years, who sat behind me. That's another strategy for another day. For another day. A strategy for another day. And that's where I want to wrap up my thoughts, is that this is the moment we find ourselves in. We can repeat what happened over the last 40 years and kick the can down the road and leave it to a future generation to do what we know in our hearts is time to do. We can understand that we didn't open the doors to those residential schools and we didn't write the Indian Act. We collectively inherited this deep division. We can be inspired by the young people who were arm in arm, status, non-status, on and off reserve. First Nations, Inuit and Métis, saying we've got to come together as Indigenous peoples. The elders say that's where our strength lies. We often find ourselves, when resources are low, in conflicts with one another, finding ourselves embroiled in conflicts that have been so often thrust from the outside, the very worst example, that being of the residential schools. But I am inspired, like I said earlier, by both the young people and by those who've come before me. And think about my late grandmother, when she was grasping my hand in the House of Commons, when we were listening to the apology of the Prime Minister, and she said to me, they're just beginning to see us, grandson. 2008, they're just beginning to see us, the way Shane saw me, the way I see Shane, the way here we are seeing one another. Perhaps very often informally, but make no mistake, through legislation, whether it's supporting the work of the First Nation Education Steering Committee here in British Columbia, or finding a path forward to take advantage of the announcement that the federal government made about new resources that are possible and a new path forward to jointly forge an approach that the UN Declaration says that we have the right to do. This is the moment that we've arrived at. My grandmother left me with that feeling after the apology of a sense of perhaps the beginnings of justice in her life. And she was encouraging to me. She was encouraging to me in that moment. Grandson, we no longer fight our fight with our fists any longer. We fight our fight with education. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for taking us to the next level, you guys.
Thank you. We will have a more formal thank you right at the end of the program. And I would like to now, we've changed our order slightly, introduce you to our Superintendent of Aboriginal Achievement for the province, DeDe DeRose. I'm going to ask DeDe to announce her own First Nations band name because I know I will mispronounce it. She's a graduate of the NITEP program, and her priority since graduation has been to work and advocate for improving Aboriginal student success. And she has been, for us, a friend, inspiration, supporter, and advocate, working with us on a monthly basis over the past year and a half. And we would like to give her the opportunity to tell you a little bit about that process. DeDe?
I'd say one of life's biggest challenges to me may be happening right now when I follow such an amazing speaker. I'd like to thank Shane. I can't see very well. I think he's still in the building. Oh, he is. Thank you. That was most inspirational. And you stole half my speech. So it's unfortunate. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be here late today, so I apologize. I live in Kamloops and caught a plane to come here, and somehow I'm not here on time. But I was here in time to hear your words, so thank you so much. Waked and good morning. I'd like to begin my presentation by recognizing the traditional territory of the Musqueam people and thanking Shane Pointe for his opening. I'm honored to be able to participate in your Podi Day today entitled Public Education and Urban Aboriginal People, Reconciliation and Collaboration. I was going to present in 3 parts: reconciliation, collaboration, and a story about my role as I see it and all of the pieces coming together in schools. I will shorten my speech because Shane has very eloquently addressed what I still refer to as Indian control of Indian education. Sorry, Shawn. Sorry, Shane was the elder who opened, but Shawn, thank you. I begin my presentation by sharing with you my mom's residential school report card. She attended residential school for 8 years. Every year when the truck came to the meadow to take her family away, my Ba'a told her and her family not to forget their language. He said, "When you come home, you will speak it with us." Every Aboriginal student has been impacted by the negative effects of the Canadian government's attempt to take the Indian out of the child by creating residential schools. Therefore, I carry Mom's report card as I travel throughout the province to use as a reminder to educators about our history as Aboriginal people. The report card also serves as a reminder to me that no matter how challenging my career and life gets, it'll never be as bad as it was for my ancestors. Justice Sinclair said at the Truth and Reconciliation event held in Vancouver, "It's education that got us into this mess, and it's going to be education that gets us out." He reminded the 5,000 plus students, educators, residential school survivors, and families that the history of residential school is not only Aboriginal people's history, but also Canadians' history. Finally, he said, and I agree, that every Canadian needs to learn what happened in residential schools in order for true reconciliation to take place. Happily, immediately following the event, we started meeting to work on sharing the history of residential schools within BC. The Ministry of Education, in its most recent draft of the curriculum plan, has included the history of residential school, finally, in its draft. Along with that, the BCTF, the ministry, and Aboriginal communities are working on resources to support that. And you probably can tell that I'm an elementary school principal because I bring things for you to see. Here's the grade 5 draft that we met with about last Friday. These resources are currently in draft, will be piloted this spring, and be available for schools soon after. Like I said, the Indian control of Indian education has been shared, the goals of it. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're working in BC on local control, as in school districts having Aboriginal representatives working in advisories now. Parental involvement, where schools are finding creative ways to involve Aboriginal parent involvement through hosting events such as dinners and community meetings. I think one of the most important is embedding culture, values, and language into the curriculum. The province is transforming the curriculum as we speak to ensure that local Aboriginal languages, cultures, and histories are embedded throughout all subject areas. Finally, Aboriginal students will see themselves reflected across the curriculum in all subject areas and not only in the grade 4 social studies unit. Equally as exciting for me is that all students are going to learn about our contributions to education. One of the other challenges is to increase the number of Aboriginal teachers. As you heard, I'm a NITEP grad, and this year UBC is going to celebrate 40 years of hosting the NITEP program. We have 361 graduates out of the program. NITEP is the only Aboriginal-only BEd program, but I also know that BEd programs across BC are also reserving seats for Aboriginal students. However, there continues to be a challenge in ensuring that Aboriginal educators, once graduated, have jobs in school districts. Truly, the ideal learning environment for Aboriginal learners will be when Aboriginal people are in roles across the education system, including school trustees, senior administration, school-based administration, teachers, and support staff. We still have a ways to go, for example, I'm working currently with the Superintendent's Association on developing an Aboriginal mentorship leadership program. Finally, we need to provide learning opportunities in order for all educators to be culturally sensitive. I believe that this one needs to happen in order for anything else to take place. We need to make sure that all educators understand our history and that local history, culture, and ways of knowing are taught well throughout the BC curriculum. An important beginning took place when I sat at the College of Teachers for 8 years, now called the Teacher Regulation Board. And in 2012, we passed a motion that in order for pre-service educators in BC to be certified, they had to take a mandatory course in Aboriginal education. That was the happiest moment of my 8 years at that table. Since then, however, because there are many educators who are going to be in the system for a very long time, we're looking at other learning opportunities to ensure that all educators understand the challenges and also understand our wonderful diversity and more about our language and cultures. So I'm working with UBC, who's working on a massive online open course called MOOC that's in draft and will be loosely based on the pre-service course that all pre-service educators are taking. Besides these wonderful initiatives that flow out of the Indian Control of Indian Education guidelines, there are 2 other initiatives that I wanted to share with you that are happening in BC. The first being the First Nations Education Steering Committee. It was established in 1992. It represents over 100 Aboriginal communities across BC. FNESC won legal recognition to be a decision-making body in the education of Aboriginal children in federal legislation in 2006 and in provincial legislation in 2007. Also, in 1999, almost all of BC's education partners formed a K-12 education partners table that in my role I chair. That group signed a guiding memorandum of understanding in 1999 that says, "We, the undersigned, acknowledge the Aboriginal learners are not experiencing success in BC. We state our intention to work together within the mandates of our respective organizations to improve school success for Aboriginal learners." Now, you've heard about federal, you've heard about my role as a provincial leader, and I thought I would close my comments today by talking about me as a school-based principal. Although I believe that all the above initiatives with FNESC, the ministry, the federal government, and the K-12 table are important to Aboriginal students' achievement, they are not as important as the frontline role of educators in classrooms and schools. Therefore, I will conclude my presentation today by sharing with you a story from my role as a principal. For those of you who don't know, I'm seconded from a large elementary school in Kamloops. My school has about the provincial average of 15% Aboriginal students. My story is about an Aboriginal student named Rose, not her real name. You might notice DeRose, Rose. When I arrived to my school as a new principal, it seemed that Rose came to school every day with a plan to challenge her teacher and me. She was labeled a Category H, severe behavior, and had MCFD and Secwepemc family services involved. Her mom lived on the streets of Vancouver, and her dad, when he worked in camp. When he was home, she lived with him, and when he was at work, she lived in a foster home by agreement. Her older sister lived in a different foster home. When I started at the school, Rose was one of the first students to be sent to me. Quickly, it became apparent that she had frustrated my staff as she tried to find ways to make adults angry so she could be sent home. Before I go further into my story, I want to share with you that I believe that every student has the ability and wants to be successful. In order to accomplish that, their family must trust and believe that the school wants to support their child. Finally, I believe that every parent loves their child and supports them in the very best way they know how. I called Rose's dad early in my first year, invited him to come into my school for a meeting. He came barging into the school, and my secretary thought he was going to attack me. He was so angry. He sat down, and I got him a cup of coffee before sharing with him that I thought his daughter was extremely talented and believed that if we worked together to support her with her gift for debating, she would be a lawyer one day, one that I'd like to hire. He shifted his demeanor and shared with me the challenges he faced being a single dad to such a smart little girl. He said he knew that she was smart and that he tried to compensate for choices he and her mother had made. By the time he left, we developed a communication plan, and I committed to sharing both good and challenging stories about his daughter with him. He did the same. I made a commitment to him that regardless of how we moved, both the school and her home had to commit to ensuring that we didn't destroy that wonderful twinkle in her eye. Rose didn't like our plan. She continued to be sent to my office, and I learned that she was using negative behavior toward us to get attention and because she was ashamed of her family. She believed that my staff made judgments about them too, and because she loved them, she felt defensive and angry toward us. In my office, we talked about her perceptions of herself in school, her family, and as an Aboriginal girl. I shared that I too had relatives living on streets of cities in BC, that I also had difficulty when I was a girl, and even a beginning teacher, to find ways not to feel shame or embarrassment for some of the decisions my relatives made. I told her what my mom told me, that they're still a part of my family. They are no better or worse than me or anyone else. I told her that we didn't know what happened to them in their lives to put them where they are today. Gradually, she learned that she couldn't control her immediate family, but she could control herself. That's when we began to see a change in her behavior toward her peers and staff. All we did was provide her with an environment to learn about herself in what many would call a chaotic family. We made inroads with her because she felt safe, valued, a sense of belonging, and most importantly, she knew that her dad was fully informed and supported by us. By the way, her achievements academically far exceeded our expectations. Now, this is the part of the story that I think you'll enjoy, the twinkle in her eye part. When Rose finished grade 7 and was preparing to go to secondary school, she came to thank me and give me a picture that she had drawn. I told her that I was going to miss our passionate debates and that she reminded me of my son. That's why I'm such a good debater. She told me that she was going to miss them too, because it was fun to see if she could make me mad. She gave me a hug and paid me what she thought was a compliment. She told me that I reminded her of her idol. Who, you ask? Nicki Minaj. After she left, I came out of my office and said to my secretary, "Who's Nicki Minaj?" And through gales of laughter, my secretary brought up a picture of Nicki on the computer. Not exactly the image I was going for. In conclusion, I encourage all educators to be that teacher, principal, support staff who believe in their students. Be the one who gets to know them, their family, and their community. Be the one who makes school so interesting and relevant that they'll climb over mountains to get to you. Be the one who ensures that your environment is a safe place to fall, and when you challenge them, and be a place where they are not afraid to meet your challenge. Be that educator you remember with fondness, the one who made school relevant, fun, interesting, and exciting. Be the Nicki Minaj's to your students. We as educators need to be mindful that it's an honor to teach Aboriginal students, just as it's an honor to teach all students. We must continue to commit to improve BC's Aboriginal student stories, one student at a time. I look forward to the day when Aboriginal students and all students graduate with a positive knowledge about Aboriginal cultures and histories, and they all graduate with a full dogwood at 100%. I look forward to the day when there's not a need for a superintendent of Aboriginal achievement in BC. Cooks Jatcham.
I want to thank DeDe for those words. Thank as well our elder Shane Pointe for his opening. And Shawn, I'd like to very much honor the words that you have given to us this morning. Within the province of British Columbia, we have 62,000 Aboriginal students. British Columbia is unique amongst provinces insofar as we have been tracking Aboriginal students for the last 20 years. And we've been tracking both on-reserve and off-reserve students. No other province is doing that. The reality in British Columbia today, we have 62,000 Aboriginal students. 53,000 of those are in the public school system. We have a little over 8,000 of our students are being educated on reserve. Of those 8,000 plus students, a very high percentage of them will take part in a public high school. It is imperative, therefore, that urban Aboriginal peoples, the Assembly of First Nations, the ministries, we all work together and collaborate for the benefit of our students. We have the resources. We have the best educated teaching force in the world in British Columbia. We have to live up to that, to work to our best effort in terms of providing services to our students. In Vancouver, we have 2,100 students. We have, our students are now starting to turn the corner in terms of their graduation rates. We have a long, long ways to go. But we will not be successful until we get every party and every sector working together. I had the privilege of the last couple of days to be at the University of British Columbia to take part in a families conference. I co-chair the National Collaborating Center for Aboriginal Health, and we have in the past numbers of years gathered together people across the country to talk about grandparents, about parenting, about families, and about fathers. And this was the fourth of our gathering. And during that gathering, two things really impacted me. We have just a wonderful group of people across the country working for the same, in the same way that we are working in education to build our families, build our relationships. An elder, Maria Campbell, who's a dear friend and I've known for many years, used a quote that struck not only me, but many of us in the audience. And she said that when we look at ourselves, we must imagine ourselves richly. I want to repeat that. We must imagine ourselves richly. We live up to the expectations that we have. And Shawn, when you're talking about to these young men about think about your graduation and what your father said, no, you can do it. We need to create an opportunity for all of our students in our classes to imagine ourselves as successful. Watching the Olympics, I've noticed that many of the skiers are going through a visualization process prior to them coming down to be successful. That's the same process that each one of us must do. That's the same process that we must incorporate within our teaching function and ask our children to do as well, and our students, to imagine yourself successful, imagine yourself richly. And the other thing that really struck me was a message from a man from Maoriland. And it reminded me when he said this of we've always had in our communities the notion that we must think 7 generations ahead when we start to make decisions that may affect us. But this gentleman said that in his land, the word that the elders say is that it is best to influence our children 100 years before they are born. It is best to influence our children 100 years before they are born. Now is the time that we can bring our workers together, our teachers together, our sectors together, our Aboriginal groups together, the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, the Inuit Tapert Kanata, all Aboriginal groups, and all of our institutions to start to influence those children 100 years before they are born. So thank you very much for your attention this morning. We have some gifts we want to give to our presenters, and our youth will present those down below. But Maureen may have one last word to say.
Thank you. We're very fortunate to have our students here to present to if you want to come up on stage actually to present, that would be great, and we could have our presenters come up as well. So if DeDe and Shawn and Shane could all come back up. It's 1-0 Canada. just, just to put everything in perspective. And I think it's one. I think we've got 1 point for Aboriginal awareness today too. Easy to figure out who she is. And is Shane gone?
Yeah. I wonder if you could open those. These gifts were made by one of our workers for our program. We have a staff of 40, and she made them specially for our guests and our participants.
Thank you. Would you please join me in giving a very big round of applause to our presenters and special guests here today? Thank you so much. We've run slightly over time. I would like to express a great thanks to all the staff here who have helped organize today, to the staff out in the sites who have helped with the organization, particularly to Don Fiddler and his Aboriginal Education Department staff, and Donna Wong from the area office. We appreciate everyone's attention. There will be coffee at the foyer here after. We hope you'll join us, and at all of the other school locations as well, and that you'll take the opportunity to connect with others to talk about what we've heard here today. And for anyone at Magoo who wishes to join in a facilitated discussion, I will be in the foyer to take them somewhere at 10:30. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful professional development day.
Great job.